The year is 1393. Picture this: in the glittering palace of Saint-Ouen, near Paris, a 24-year-old king suddenly stops mid-sentence during a heated council meeting. His eyes glaze over, his face contorts with rage, and without warning, he draws his sword and begins attacking his own knights. The King of France has gone mad. Today we're plunging into the madness that would tear France apart for decades, witnessing the dramatic end of one of history's most feared military orders, exploring a brilliant tactical revolution in the Balkans, and uncovering how a Mongol warlord's rampage would reshape the Islamic world forever. Welcome to 1393, a year when empires trembled and the medieval world began to crack at its foundations. Let's start with that terrifying scene in the French court. Charles VI's sudden descent into madness wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a geopolitical earthquake that would define European politics for generations. The attack on his own councillors was just the beginning. Some days, Charles believed he was made of glass and would shatter if touched. Other days, he forgot he was king entirely, cowering from servants he didn't recognize. But here's what makes this year so pivotal: the power vacuum his illness created unleashed a vicious struggle between two of the most powerful men in France. On one side, Louis, Duke of Orleans, the king's own brother, charming, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. On the other, Philip the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, the king's uncle, older, craftier, and commanding vast territories that stretched from Flanders to the Mediterranean. Picture the tension in those council chambers. Every royal decree, every tax levy, every military decision now had to pass through these two rivals. Philip, with his wine-rich Burgundian estates and profitable Flemish cities, controlled France's purse strings. But Louis held something even more valuable: direct access to the Mad King during his lucid moments. The consequences? France, Europe's most powerful kingdom, was slowly tearing itself in two. Little did anyone know that this rivalry would eventually explode into civil war and leave France defenseless before English invasion. But that's a story for future years. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, one of the most dramatic endings in medieval history was unfolding. The Knights Templar, yes, those Templars, were finally, definitively destroyed. Now wait, you might be thinking, didn't the Templars get suppressed decades ago? Well, yes and no. When Philip IV of France destroyed the main order in 1312, scattered groups of Templar knights fled to the furthest corners of Christendom. Some found refuge in Cyprus, others in Rhodes, still others in the remote castles of Aragon. For over 80 years, these remnants had clung to existence, hoping for rehabilitation, maintaining their ancient rituals in secret. But this year marked their absolute end. The last Templar commander in Cyprus, a grizzled veteran named Raymond Dupuy, finally surrendered the order's remaining assets to the Hospitallers. Imagine the symbolism: knights who had once been Europe's most feared warriors, who had held Jerusalem's walls against Saladin, were now handing over their last few gold coins and crumbling fortresses to their old rivals. The Hospitallers, ever practical, simply absorbed what was useful and melted down the rest. But here's the fascinating detail that most miss: some of these final Templars didn't just disappear. Records show that several joined other military orders, carrying their secrets and traditions with them. Others became mercenaries, their distinctive fighting techniques spreading across Europe's battlefields. The Templar legacy lived on, just not in the way they'd hoped. Speaking of military innovation, something extraordinary was happening in the windswept plains of Wallachia. A battle was about to be fought that would revolutionize European warfare, and most of the continent would never even hear about it. Micha the Elder, now there's a name that deserves to be better known, ruled this buffer state between the expanding Ottoman Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary. Imagine his predicament: Ottoman armies were pushing north, Hungarian politics were in chaos, and his small principality sat directly in the crossfire. The Ottoman force that descended on Wallachia that spring was massive, perhaps 40,000 men, including the elite Janissary Corps and thousands of Turkish cavalry. Against them, Micha could field barely 10,000 warriors. By every reasonable calculation, Wallachia should have been crushed. But Micha had been studying his enemies carefully. He'd noticed something about Ottoman tactics: they relied heavily on massive frontal assaults, expecting their superior numbers to overwhelm defenders. What if, instead of meeting them head-on, he gave ground strategically? At Rovine, Micha deployed what military historians now recognize as one of the first truly effective uses of defense in depth. He arranged his forces in multiple lines, each designed to slow the Ottoman advance while inflicting maximum casualties. When the Turks broke through the first line, as expected, they found another waiting. Then another. The result was stunning. The Ottoman army, exhausted by repeated assaults, finally broke and retreated. It was one of their first major defeats in Europe, and it bought precious time for the fragmented kingdoms of the Balkans. But here's what makes this truly significant: Nietzsche's tactics would be studied and adapted across Europe. The principle of strategic defense in depth would become central to military thinking for centuries. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not by who advances furthest, but by who retreats most cleverly. Now, let's journey east to witness devastation on a scale that beggars belief. In the vast expanses of Central Asia, a conqueror was carving his name into history with blood and fire: Tamerlane, known to his followers as Timur the Lame. This year found Tamerlane at the height of his power and the depth of his fury. The Golden Horde, descendants of Genghis Khan who controlled the steppes north of the Black Sea, had made a fatal error. They'd raided one of his tributary cities. Tamerlane's response was characteristically brutal. His army, a perfectly orchestrated machine of destruction, swept north across the Caucasus like a force of nature. But this wasn't just mindless violence, it was calculated terror on an industrial scale. Here's a detail that captures the sheer scale of Tamerlane's operations: his scribes kept meticulous records of destruction. Cities weren't just conquered, they were systematically dismantled. Populations weren't just defeated, they were catalogued, sorted, and often eliminated with bureaucratic precision. The city of Astrakhan, a major trading center on the Volga, simply ceased to exist after Tamerlane's visit. Archaeological evidence suggests the site was abandoned so completely that it wasn't resettled for decades. Imagine a thriving commercial hub with thousands of inhabitants, reduced to empty ruins in a matter of weeks. But perhaps most chilling of all was Tamerlane's trademark: pyramids of skulls built outside conquered cities. These weren't just symbols of victory, they were calculated psychological warfare. Word of these monuments spread faster than his armies, causing cities hundreds of miles away to surrender without a fight. By year's end, Tamerlane controlled territory stretching from Delhi to Damascus, from Ankara to the Aral Sea. It was an empire built on terror, held together by fear, and it would reshape the Islamic world for centuries. As we close this chapter on 1393, notice how each of these stories reveals cracks in the medieval world's foundations. France's Mad King showed how quickly divine monarchy could crumble. The last Templars demonstrated that even the most sacred institutions could fade into memory. Nietzsche's victory proved that new military thinking could topple established powers. And Tamerlane's conquests revealed that the age of the great nomad conquerors wasn't over, it was entering its final, most terrifying phase. Next year, these fractures would deepen. England and France would edge closer to renewed war, the Ottoman Empire would begin recovering from its Wallachian defeat, and Tamerlane would turn his terrible attention toward new targets. The medieval world was transforming, and 1394 would bring changes that no one could have imagined. The age of certainties was ending. The age of chaos had begun. And so concludes our journey through 1393. Join us next time as we explore what the year 1394 has in store.